You worked for the MPA. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences there?
I had such a fun time because even though you could argue that all media were challenged as there were recessions, both when I joined in the early 2000s and then as I was leaving in the late 2000s, there was a time of so much change and so much to capitalize on. So we did a lot of early work with the magazine industry and helping them with digital as online began to really take off. Did some work with smartphones and tablets as I was leaving. And also, it's not widely known, but we were the group that put engagement on the map. We did some strategic work with a company in around 2004 to determine what people felt magazine strengths really were, and learned that the media buying community felt that a real strength of magazines was that people were paying attention to them when they read. And so we coined the phrase media engagement, which then took off.
Can you expand a bit on the findings and the recommendations from these studies?
Well, not all of it was studies. A lot of the studies were done by our members. A lot of it was just helping members to understand the basics of the space, more about consumer usage that was in the public domain, and also how to think about it as suddenly they weren't just competing in a print environment, but they were competing on other platforms as well, for example in video, because many magazines were posting video on their own websites.
Where do you think the print industry stands at this point?
I think the print industry is in the same place that every industry is, and that is in transition. There is so much change going on and so many different ways in which all media companies are having to adapt. I did some work last year for a major digital publisher who'd been around for a number of years, and they were mature at that point as a traditional digital publisher, and so they were facing the same challenges as every other industry. How do you look at the new platforms? What does it mean for your content? What does it mean for how you promote your content to consumers? And what does it mean for advertising?
Let's talk about some of the breakthrough technologies and resulting research that you've experienced.
Well, I'm doing a project right now in online video, and what's fascinating there is the number of different segments within online video. You have, as you do with traditional digital banner ads, you have the ad networks, you have premium content, you have new players coming in, you have traditional players entering the space, and it's causing both upheaval but a lot of opportunity both for consumers and for advertisers. And what's exciting is all the experimentation in this space and the new ways in which various companies are trying to approach consumers and advertisers to create new solutions. Another area in which I've worked is social TV analytics. I was fortunate that a company called Ideas and Solutions brought me into a project they were doing in this space. That's another example of something that 2 years ago people weren't talking about at all, but has the potential to change the way that we think about TV measurement, because the sharing of content, the commenting on content, may be seen as a form of engagement in the future and might inform people about how advertising works in the space, how consumers respond to programming, what kind of content is the most valuable both on the programming side and the advertising side. And again, it's something relatively new that we're going to continue to see how it works.
So Ellen, let's define engagement.
If I could find engagement, Charlene, I would be making a lot of money right now because everybody would want the definition. I think one of the interesting pieces of engagement is it's not just one definition. It actually has to vary by the platform. So for some media, it might be time spent, as in a video completion. For other media, it might not be. One of the lessons learned in the magazine business is you can have a celebrity magazine where people may not spend a lot of time, but they're fully engaged in the content because it's what they want to read about and pay attention to, whereas in other magazines they want to read long-form articles and immerse. So time spent is just one dimension. There are other dimensions of engagement: enjoyment and likability, sharing, how people respond to it in other ways that might be analogous to direct response kind of measures, such as click-through or intent to buy. So I think we're still learning a lot about what matters, but I think if we try to boil it down to one measure, we'll be making a mistake.
The question then becomes, how can this be quantified, scaled, and equitably evaluated in the media marketplace so that it can be, in some cases, a metric that can be bought and sold?
A lot of the factors I just spoke about can be quantified. Time spent can be quantified. Number of times somebody picks up a magazine, for example, can be quantified. And with all of the technology available, it's easy to scale that. The real question is, how are we going to interpret it? Because the danger is that people latch on to a number and say, this is the answer. The reality is, in most cases, the number is the start of the thinking, and we have to remember the thinking as well as the analysis. The challenge comes for both buyers and sellers in how to explain that to procurement, because we all know that a GRP is not a GRP. A Super Bowl GRP is not the same as a GRP on a reality show. People attune to them differently, they respond to the advertising differently. So we need to find ways to think about that, and perhaps some of the new metrics that are emerging, metrics like commenting on and sharing, will offer new ways in which we can look at that.
Do you see the media sales marketplace evolving so that some of these new metrics are integrated in some form with your standard spots and dots?
It's not just the media sales marketplace, it's the whole ecosystem that has to think about this, because the real question is, how do we value media? And when we begin to think about the way in which we value media, we're going to get to a point where it's not just the number of people who've seen something or heard something if you're radio. We're going to say, how did they see or hear it? How did they react to it? What does that mean for my business? So I think the challenge is we could end up in this chaos of too many metrics. I think if we're smart, what we'll do is we'll have a reasonable set and understand how they should be applied to different types of media and platforms, and we'll use our brains to think about that.